Hello, in this video I'm going to finish the story. So where I left it, Mike had finally left, it was dark, and the guy who had been telling me that he could take me to these bungalows that he, I think, co-owned, he finally agreed to do that, you know, because he didn't feel he had to stay there because Mike was there. So it was finally over for that night, and I went somewhere else to stay. You know, this guy finally took me to this other place where I could stay, and as soon as I arrived, I knew that I needed to offload to someone. When your body is traumatized by something that's just happened, it's good to talk to someone. It doesn't really matter who, because unless they're a complete psychopath, they're going to be better than no one, you know. And so I went to speak to somebody who I'd met already. She worked in a yoga school on the island and was English. I'd spoken to her briefly a couple of times and she'd seemed fine, you know, quite friendly. So I went to find her knowing that I needed to speak to someone, tell them what happened and start to calm down. It was too big to be on my own with. Well, she actually wasn't there, her colleague was there and asked what's wrong, and I said I need to speak to someone. When I talk about what I did to calm that stress down, I refer to it as trauma. And, you know, so that might sound over dramatic to some people, especially if they haven't experienced narcissistic abuse, or at least not much. I think everyone probably has to some degree in their lifetime. But yeah, so that might sound over dramatic, but it's actually very true. You know, I was emotionally threatened for several hours, from the early morning, from 8:30 in the morning till, in the end, about 7 at night. And, you know, and it was an experience that I couldn't get away from. It's quite dark now, but I just want to add this in. Trauma is when your experiences of stress are too great for you to integrate all of the feelings you have around that. And so it means that you're overwhelmed. So if you have a lot of stress in that goes on, so for example in this situation that went on for this period of time, I wasn't able to take time in a safe environment to offload them, and so it would have been a cumulative experience of stress, and it was a traumatic experience. So what I needed to do was take the time to let all of those emotions come to the surface, all of my emotions about that experience. Because when you're in fight or flight mode, you can't unravel all of these different feelings. Everything is tight and tense and narrow in order to keep you safe. If I didn't release it, then I would risk having some PTSD from that experience. I might have had nightmares. I might have kept seeing Mike in my head. I might have been just very tense for it could have lasted for weeks maybe. So that's why when you're in a situation that's really stressful, it's really good to make sure that you fully recover, that you really pay attention to fully recovering before you get on with normal life. So I ended up going to this yoga studio, speaking to a colleague of the lady because she wasn't there, and you know, I told her everything that happened. She ended up being a really good person to tell because she is a yoga teacher. So, you know, she was, when I was getting really stressed, she was saying, breathe, relax, you know, it was just great at the time. And after I got everything out of my system and told her everything that had happened, I just felt a bit more like I'd left that situation. It was still in my body. I still felt all the stress, but I felt a bit more like I'm back in the world. I wasn't disassociating. I'm back here again now. I've told somebody I also felt a real urgency to leave that island. I didn't know if that guy was going to appear again in the morning. I knew it would be very easy for him to find out where I was staying. I ended up going at about 10 o'clock to a guy who sells boat tickets. 10 o'clock at night this was, because, you know, it was late by the time I got to the room and so on. And saying to him, I need to leave the island. It was a bit like some kind of thriller film, you know, because I was saying, you know, just need to get me off the island. And he said, the last boat's gone. And I said, how much is it for a private boat? It would have cost an absolute fortune to hire a boat in the middle of the night and just go out on this private boat. It would have cost about, I think it would have cost about 20 times what it would have cost in the daytime. And so then I was like, oh, okay, maybe not. I'll just go really early in the morning then. And he was saying, you know, he had a pen and he had a map. This is why it was like a thriller, you know. He was like, I could get you from here to here, and then there'll be a car to pick you up, and then that will drive you to here, and then from here you're near the airport. No one's going to find you here. That was quite funny, and you know, I could kind of appreciate that it was funny, because I thought, well, I'm soon going to be going to safety. Anyway, I ended up going to Bali because I was told that was a different police jurisdiction. So I thought, you know, once I've left here, I'll go to Bali. No one's going to come and try and get me there because there's going to be different police. Everything's going to be okay. So I went, but even then, really early in the morning, I had breakfast with the guy that sold me the boat tickets. He told me he was a tourist policeman and in plain clothes. And I had a lot of doubt about that. But to be honest, I didn't care. You know, he was a man who told me that he was on my side and he was going to get me away, and that guy wasn't going to be able to do anything about it. So I didn't want to be on my own that morning. You know, I paid for his breakfast just so that he would sit there with me, and in case that guy turned up. Then when the boat came, I got on the boat. I got to Bali after, it was quite a long ride. Well, it was a couple of hours, I think. And then in Bali, I got to the hotel I was going to, which took ages to get to because of all the traffic. And even then, even when I was at least 4 or 5 hours away from where that guy had been, I didn't feel safe, and I felt worried that he would find me. And so I told the management there what had happened. I said, I'm afraid that this man's going to come, don't let him in. And I told them everything, and I went to the tourist police. That was the first thing I did when I got there. The tourist police weren't particularly helpful. They didn't want to know. They didn't want to write anything down. They just said, you'll be fine. And I said, he said something about them taking my passport, and they said, no one's going to do that, you're going to be fine. So I left it there. I did nothing for a couple of days, absolutely nothing. I just relaxed. I had planned to have no Skype sessions with people over those couple of days. So I just completely relaxed and let the trauma leave my body. I looked at the sky a lot. I find that really therapeutic, just watching the clouds move. They were moving really fast. In Bali, they tend to move quite fast. And I wanted to show you what I was doing. So at that time, I took a video of the sky to show you and burnt my phone out in the process. Now I can't use all of the keys because the sun was shining so brightly on them. But anyway, I took some time out just to completely get over what had happened and de-stress. I had massages every day as well. My back was still bad, so I went to see this kind of physiotherapy guy. And then I got a WhatsApp message from the guy that sold me the boat ticket. It was a forwarded message from Mike's colleague, and it was sent to immigration asking them to block my passport.
So at that point, I called this guy that had sent it to me, and I was really worried, you know. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what I kind of assumed that it meant my passport had been blocked. So I called him up, and he just said, "Hello, how are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm really stressed." And then he hung up, and I don't know if that was accidental or not, but at the same time I was thinking, why does he have this forwarded message in his phone? I never sent another message to him because I was always left wondering, how come he forwarded that message? The only reason he'd know about that message is if he knew someone in immigration, which could be the case. It could be innocent what he did, but it could also be that he got in touch with the hotel and they forwarded it to him, and that he was hoping that if he helped me, I would pay him to help me, because he'd written me a message saying, "I can still help you if you want." And I'd by that time come to realise just how much corruption there is in Indonesia, unfortunately, you know, and how much people are open to being bribed. So I called instead the tourist police in Bali, and I spoke to somebody who was really high up in the police, because it just so happened that I'd bumped into him when I'd gone to the police before. And he told me to go and see him, and he said, "Don't worry, they are trying to stop your passport, but that doesn't mean it's going to work. It's really hard to get your passport stopped." So that was a huge relief, and I thought everything was going to be okay. Actually, what happened was I went to the police station at the time that I was, you know, that it was arranged, and this was a couple of days later, and there were 2 police there and no one else in the reception area, and they told me to sit down. And then the first thing one of them said, and he was the policeman who was quite high up in the police, the first thing he said to me was, "You're beautiful." So obviously that was just incredibly inappropriate, and I just, you know, my feeling was, oh great, you know, I've come here hoping that these people are actually going to help me, and this is how the conversation begins. So I think I just pretended I hadn't heard what he said, and I just talked to the other one. I started talking to the other one, and then the other one, then they spoke for a moment, and then the other one said, "He said you're beautiful." So I said, "Oh, thanks." And then they wanted photos with me. So this is again a case of, where do you go to feel safe, you know, in this kind of situation? I was still not over the trauma of what had happened. It was still there in my body. I still had all of that, and now I was in this situation with these 2 police, and no one else was in the police station, and so I just felt uneasy there. There were a couple of moments when I wondered. I kind of felt, when there were the 2 of them, I felt like nothing terrible is going to happen. I didn't have that feeling that something was going to happen, but I still felt uncomfortable. And anyway, I told one of them everything that had happened, and he said that actually they could stop my passport, even though legally they couldn't. I wouldn't be on the computer because I hadn't done anything wrong, but they could ask. He said that this guy is very good friends with immigration, and he said so they can choose to block your passport, and you'd get through immigration and you'd have to pay them. They'd ask you for 5 times the amount of money or 10 times the amount of money at immigration, you know. So they said you'd have to. I'd already bought my ticket out, but it was from that airport where that immigration was in Lombok, and so as a result, I had to. They suggested I bought another ticket and went to a different airport. And even in Bali, they said that the immigration people in Lombok know the people in Bali. So they all know each other, and then there's Timor as well. Apparently those three airports, immigration, are all great friends with each other. The first time I'd gone to the police, this guy had told me that the police could help me through the airport. So I reminded him of that, and he said, yes, yeah, we could have a couple of police accompany you through the airport. He said, I'll ask the airport, but you'd probably have to pay a bit of money to the airport. And then shortly after that, they asked if I wanted to go out drinking with them on the Friday, which was a couple of days later. And I said, I don't drink, which isn't true, but at that point I felt like I don't want them to accompany me through the airport. What happens? You know, they would have been in a car as well, and I thought, what? I don't like the idea of being with these two guys in a car. And so I decided that I was going to try and just go to a different airport away from Bali as well. One of the policemen then left the room, and the other one was with me and asking if I could spend more time with him. That felt obviously really uncomfortable, and I just left as soon as I could. But you know, he had to call me what they call a grab, which is like an Uber, because I can't remember why I couldn't. Maybe my phone was out of battery or something. So again, I had to rely on someone who I didn't really feel comfortable with and didn't trust. I texted the policeman asking him if Jakarta would definitely be safe to leave from, and he sent a really annoyed reply saying that I should trust them, and why wouldn't I go with them? But they had meanwhile found out that it was going to cost me an absolute fortune to go with them, to just have these two policemen accompany me. So they were going to charge me for their police services. So I ended up just ignoring them and having to just sort it out myself and take that risk and hope that Jakarta would be safe. I think I got about 3 angry text messages from one of these policemen. So I ended up getting a domestic flight from Bali to Jakarta, and then from Jakarta I left the country. And I was so scared as I went through immigration. You know, the guy just seemed to take so long looking at my passport. But that was okay. I went through and it was okay. And then I happened to speak to someone in the airport who told me that immigration in Jakarta airport used to be terrible. They used to all demand money and be paid, until the president had said something about how it had to get better in Jakarta airport. So luckily, by the time I went, it was fine.
Once I arrived in Kuala Lumpur, I could finally relax. I can't tell you how stressful it is when you fear leaving a country, when you fear that it's going to be really hard to get out of a country that you want to leave. You know, and that was what I experienced for I think it was at least a week. It was maybe 10 days after that experience with Mike. So when I was in Kuala Lumpur, I had to replay what I'd tried to do earlier and once again release the stress from my body and focus on undoing the trauma that had just happened to me so that it didn't sit with me.
I told clients that I wasn't going to be able to see them. You know, I had to cancel some sessions and I had to rearrange some sessions. I had to tell people over email that I wasn't going to be able to get back to them for a couple of days, because the key priority was for me to not be holding this trauma. I needed to get it out of my body. I stayed in quite a nice hotel, so it cost money in that sense, but I prioritized feeling better above everything else, because you have to. Your mental health really is the main priority. I couldn't have been particularly helpful to other people if I was myself really still stressed about what had happened. So that was another thing that I wanted to talk about, is what you do with these things, with these experiences. A lot of people would rush back into work, would just keep going, would just try and get over it, And I think when you do that, there's the danger of it staying in your body and staying in your unconscious. You need to process it. I do a lot of mindfulness, so I was doing mindfulness non-stop really over that period of time, just experiencing those feelings and letting them go. And so it meant that it took time and it took money, and it probably caused some frustration to some people. And it certainly wasn't ideal, but I didn't see it as that I had any choice. I knew that was the key priority from knowing about how unhelpful it can be to not do that. That way, after a few days, I got it out of my system and I felt much better, and I could get on with things without holding all of that inside me.
If you've been traumatised in the past, then it will take a bit less of a similar situation to re-traumatise you. And so that old trauma will come back to the surface. And that's why when people talk about PTSD, it doesn't just relate to war veterans. PTSD is something that people can suffer from when they've experienced narcissistic abuse, especially if they've experienced it in childhood as well, and they've become, they've been re-traumatized over and over again during their adult life. That they might have been drawn to narcissists because that's what was familiar to them. We all are drawn to what's familiar. And or they might even have been drawn into relationships with narcissists. So people who've experienced it since childhood, when something horrible happens with a narcissist, they'll get re-traumatized. I experienced narcissistic abuse in my childhood, in my family, so I understand how easy it is to think that to sort of buy into the narcissist's lies really about you, and to think that the way they behave says something about you. And I've had to work on myself to be able to question that each time, and I've also learnt a lot about narcissists, and I think those two things combined can be what you need in order to be able to be objective when this kind of behaviour is going on, and to not just get triggered and to feel like you can't think logically, you can only think emotionally. Because that's really the trick. The trick is to be able to think logically and to not get caught up in emotional thinking. And the narcissist will do everything they can to get you to think emotionally, because that they know, sort of unconsciously, they just know that way you're not going to be able to have your defences up. You're going to be vulnerable. I have experienced complex PTSD myself, so I know how when you've got it, things can trigger you quite quickly, and it can be really hard to not use emotional thinking. So that's something I've needed to work on as well. But I'm telling you this because, and I'm sure I'll talk more about it in future videos, but I'm just telling you this so that you know that just because you're in that situation now, for anyone who is, it doesn't mean it's always going to be like that. And it doesn't mean that in the future you won't be able to think logically and not emotionally, and be able to separate yourself from the narcissist's illusions about you. That doesn't mean that you'll find that you can spend a lot of time with a narcissist, especially not the one who may have abused you in childhood, or just one that has abused you in the past. It just means that from a distance you can see that it was about them and not you, and it means that other narcissists that you meet, you're not going to take it personally. If you take recovering from a trauma that's just happened to you seriously, then you might need to take a few days off work. It's a frustration and so on, but I would say that it's definitely worth it. It's much better than just carrying on and trying to act like everything's normal, because it will stay with you, that trauma, and it might do it in a sort of unconscious way. You might not even know it's there, but it will be there. And over the years, traumas like that can build up inside us. while I was de-stressing, I wasn't thinking about Mike. And I think that's quite an important point, really, that because a lot of people, you know, when they're abused by a narcissist, that person gets really under their skin and they can't get that person out of their head. But when you can get to the point of understanding that that behaviour is separate from who you are, and when you can not take their behaviour as being about you, they have less of an impact. You know, who they are doesn't really matter so much. So for me, I was recovering from the stress, the feeling of threat from somebody's anger, you know, somebody's constant anger over you know, nearly 12 hours. Actually, yeah, I think it was about 11 hours altogether of being in that situation. But it wasn't about Mike. I didn't think about Mike. I didn't feel like there was anything personal going on between me and Mike, you know, because I didn't see this as to do with me personally. I saw it as Mike's issue. So the trauma that I was dealing with was from that feeling of feeling threatened. I've had experiences in the past where the person will haunt me because I have got sucked into their illusions, you know, and I have believed that I'm somehow personally involved with them in this situation. I didn't hate Mike. I didn't really feel anything about him. I mean, obviously I didn't like him, but I think the reason I was able to do that was because of what I've learnt about narcissists and understanding that his behaviour wasn't related to me, and that's helped me. I've also done a lot of work on myself and on understanding past experiences, childhood experiences with narcissists, you know, and understanding that these experiences were not actually about me, even though they felt like they were at the time. You know, the more you can understand that these experiences are about somebody's personality disorder and they're not about you, you're just a victim. It could have been another victim. The more you start to realise that, the easier it becomes to not really feel like you as a person are particularly relevant to the situation. And so when you know that you're not, you then don't really, you're not really that bothered by who they are or what they think about you. It just becomes more practical, you know, and it's sort of, okay, what is this person capable of? Am I safe? And then after the situation, it's sort of like, okay, I felt threatened at the time, and so now I want to deal with that. I want to get rid of that stress and all of that fear. I want to just get it out of my body. I just related really to the feeling in my body, and just was aware that there was a lot of stress I was carrying, and I focused on that rather than on thinking about what had happened. When you have PTSD, you can't help it. You can't control that. These thoughts come into your head. So, but immediately after an event, you can just do at least try to release that trauma there and then. You know, because if I hadn't done that, then in the next few days, maybe he would have come into my head more, and maybe I would have started to dream of him or something. And then things change, you know, that can then that would have really interfered with my life. If you stand up to a narcissist, you're going to have a hard time, but you're going to stick to your values. And if you don't, sometimes life is going to be easier, and sometimes you do have to play it like that as well. So if I'm driving on the motorway, for instance, and a man in a black BMW or a black Audi, actually, it always seems to be a black Audi, will come right up behind me
so that there's, it's really unsafe, because if I slowed down just a tiny bit, we would crash. I will always just move into the slower lane now. There was a time when a brief time where I would just think, no, I'm not moving. But that, times like that, you just have to let them win. It doesn't matter. You just need to stay alive. And so there are definitely occasions where they're going to win. Just let them win, and don't let your ego get caught up in it.
As I said in the last video, if someone had told me the night before this all started that this crazy guy was going to come and stand outside my hotel room all day and torment me, I would have just given him the money. And if I'd known that it was also going to go on for weeks and he was going to try and stop me from leaving the country, then again, of course I would have just given him the money. I wouldn't have chosen to put myself through it. But it didn't really happen like that. At lots of points in the story, it seemed like it was now going to be the end, and it wasn't. So I suppose one thing you can take from that is that somebody whose behaviour is this extreme is not going to be able to let you, I was going to say have the power or win, but neither of those really feel like the right way of saying it, because really it wasn't that. It was that he wasn't going to let me get away with, as he saw it, shaming him. So when I agreed to, when I wasn't going to put up with the way he behaved, he saw that as me shaming him. And when I was going to pay a certain amount of money and I wasn't going to budge, again, that in his mind, that was me shaming him. So he wasn't going to let that go. He felt so much shame inside himself that he would go to ridiculous lengths in order to try to avoid the shame he carried inside himself. And it's really, when you think about it, it doesn't make his life very easy either, because to have to go to such measures, to have to take a boat somewhere and sit outside someone's hotel room when you're supposed to be working, to have to speak to all these different people and ring all these different people up, to have to then get someone to contact immigration, to go to all of these lengths just to try to shield yourself from feeling the shame that you've carried since you were very young, is not an easy way to live your life, really. And that's what a narcissist has to do. Their life isn't necessarily particularly convenient. I mean, what they do, and as I'll talk about in other videos, is they do their best to make it convenient. So they start to recruit people so that it's going to be easier to try to force people into their control. If they've got all of these sort of soldiers working for them, that makes their life a bit easier. But they do actually have to spend time recruiting people as well to do their dirty work, and those are their flying monkeys, and I'll talk about them in a future video. So it's not something that I would have chosen to experience, but having experienced it, I don't carry regret actually about it. I don't look back and think, oh, I really wish I'd known. It was a bit like a really sort of intense boot camp, emotional boot camp, that was, to test my strengths and to test my ability to protect myself. So I actually don't regret that it happened. I probably ended up spending the same money he wanted me to spend on a new plane ticket, or rather 2 new plane tickets, because I had to take a domestic flight first. But I actually felt pleased that the money hadn't gone to him, that he hadn't been rewarded for being such an abusive person, for treating someone so abusively. So, and I also felt that because I wasn't now traumatized, because I'd managed to get everything out of my system and I felt back to myself again, I could look back and think, well, that was quite a learning experience. If you keep getting drawn into situations with narcissists, it can be because there's a lesson that you want to learn that you haven't yet learnt, and you don't know what it is, but somehow that experience seems to be something that you need to do. And at first you'll find that you take on board what they say and you can't help but get really personally affected by it and feel really hurt. And so everything they do will work on you. But then once you start to see these patterns of all these different people and how you bought into that illusion each time, when you start to see these people for who they really are and for what issues they all have in common, you will start to take yourself out of the equation. I don't think it's possible to not be affected by a narcissist at all if they're being really personal and really angry. I think you'd probably have to have issues yourself, really, to be the kind of person that just feels absolutely nothing from that. You might have to be quite split off from yourself. So it's just a normal human reaction to feel really uncomfortable around a person like that. But when you see that somebody is extreme in that respect, you will start to understand that it's not about you. It can't be about you because it's so extreme. You know, so just how crazy someone's behaviour is becomes in itself the reason why it's really not about you. Well, it's getting dark now, so I'm gonna have to finish this video before you can't see me anymore. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. On Friday I'm going to put out a video about McNabb and Bell, so I'll see you in that video.